the CEOs would meet weekly on that project to get it up and running for an extended period of time. Every Friday morning, it'd be meeting, and the various project teams underneath that would meet weekly as well to support that. There was a set organizational structure that allowed information and decisions to flow in a way that was pretty powerful. Nothing I've ever seen, nothing like that I've seen in my career.
Welcome to $1 Billion Projects, the only podcast sharing lessons from thought leaders who work in mining, oil and gas, and all other industrial verticals, where the projects have budgets in the millions and sometimes billions of dollars. I'm Wes Sessenwein, founder and CEO of PayShepherd, and I'll be your host as we explore insights and challenges from the projects that we consider to be the backbone of our economy. Now let's get started. Welcome, everybody, and welcome, Joe. Joe, thanks for taking the time to connect with us here today. Why don't you go ahead and provide a brief introduction?
Yeah, thank you, Wes, and look forward to today's discussion. I'm Joe Vetrone. I'm currently retired, so I've been retired for just over a year. Worked in the oil and gas industry for 34 years, coming right out of the university, and then working at Petro-Canada in their research area, and then moving through a variety of roles, which I'm sure we'll talk about during this discussion.
Often an interesting question that I get to hear the answer to is, so you tell me a little bit about what you selected to do as your during your studies and how that then resulted in you joining the oil and gas sector.
I studied chemistry when I was in university, both at undergraduate and graduate level, and then moved into the industry in 1989, a long time ago, and quickly worked on products for a variety of different customers and industry segments. I chose that industry because of the ability to apply the education that I had graduated from, and then quickly got into a variety of different opportunities, largely moving into operations and management at the early part of my career. And, I was fascinated by working for the oil and gas industry, just for the mere fact that you have the ability to work in a variety of different careers within the same organization. And certainly the company, both Petro-Canada and Suncor, that I worked for over my career allowed me the opportunity to, really explore and navigate my career in a variety of different areas.
What was Calgary like in the oil and gas sector, back in the 80s?
I mean, certainly it was, I joined at a time where there was a lot of growth expectations, along with a lot of consolidation in the 90s. Because I was largely in the refining and marketing sector, that portion of the industry went through a lot of consolidation in the 90s as we had too much capacity within Canada, a lot of smaller facilities, and it was natural for that to be rationalized over a period of time. And certainly I experienced that during, that first decade of my career. I got hired at middle of June in 89. A week later, we talked about a 2,600 person layoff, and that was a constant through, a variety of different, downsizings that occurred within the industry. And certainly it, exposed you really early in your career in terms of what was important to the company, and then how they tried to drive improvement in their operations overall.
2,600 person layoff within a couple weeks of starting your first role. How that's right out of the frying pan into the fire.
Yeah. And and exactly, it was certainly a challenging time, but also, taught you early on in your career, how to treat people and what's important to the organization, and how to, respect what they've accomplished, even though, they were no longer with the organization.
How did you do that?
Just always respecting and reflecting on individuals' careers. It's always an individual that you need to um, listen to and reflect on what they accomplished, and try to stay connected as best you could. Right, if the individuals needed that as part of the company that they were part of for all of their career, and some folks are ready to leave as well, right? So they were, at a point where they could celebrate that, and that was important to them as well. And you're learning all that history at a very early stage of your career, right? Which I think is important.
Before you have any, preconceived notions about what it is, you're starting with a blank slate to be able to experience it, right at the onset. So that's super interesting. So, okay. Um, how would you describe your ascent through Suncor in your 30 plus year career? What were the kind of key milestones for you that brought you from entry level, assuming individual contributor, up to kind of leading a large section of the organization?
Yeah. So I think right at that 7 to 10 year period, I was very much interested in moving into operations and moving into management. And so I was able to pursue that opportunity at that point in my career. And it really allowed me to branch into an area that I had not been exposed to. And, through the support I received, both within the area, within the organization, I was able to, develop. And when I reflect back, I think that was a key time for myself, um, to demonstrate the capability, to be able to, support and run day-to-day operations, but also run and be successful managing a large team. At that point, I felt like that was a bit of an inflection point where, at a frontline level, I was able to get the experience I needed, and that allowed me to be able to progress from that point. I think the second stage of my career, sort of in that 10 to 20 year period, you think about it more in terms of decades at this point, was really where, I was able to establish a, capability in a few different areas, both in terms of strategy and development, along with, some key financial analytical skills that I had developed in that period that allowed me to grow into, again, a variety of different senior leader roles. And it was really at the time where Petro-Canada and Suncor merged in 2009 that, I was afforded, a senior leader role. And then from there on, progressed into, some of the other roles that, we'll likely talk about.
Through that journey, and I actually don't have a trail marker for what the market cap of Suncor was at the time you joined, versus like relative to what it is today. But I imagine it's a tremendous amount of growth. How would you describe that?
Well, Suncor itself grew exponentially in the 90s and early period of 2000, even before the merger with Petro-Canada. And that was largely driven by the CEO at the time, which was Rick George, and his accomplishments are well known. And then he saw the opportunity to merge, two great oil companies, Suncor and Petro-Canada, in 2009, and there were great synergies between the companies that was really realized post merger. And I would say the market cap today is in that 50 to 60 billion. It's gone through some tough times in the last few years, but certainly it's on a very strong path to drive shareholder value and increase reliability from their operations, and we've seen that certainly recently. As I still follow it quite closely.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Okay. So now along your journey, if you were to think back to like the one or two, most exciting, impactful projects that you executed on uh, as a team, whatever it might be, I'm sure there's 100 of them. But is there one or two that stand out to you as being the most exciting projects that you had an opportunity to execute on with your team?
I'll call on a few examples which are more recent in nature. Um, Largely when we stood up the GHG emissions reduction team. So I was accountable to stand up a team working with industry peers around how we establish an emissions reduction plan that would achieve net zero by 2050. Within Suncor, there was one employee when I started. I was number two. And, together we built a team, and then we started to look at the best opportunities to advance our plan, both in the near term as well as longer terms towards 2050.
Would you consider that a startup?
Very much a startup, as well as, I would call it like developing an operating model, developing a strategy overall, what assets are going to be in place in 2050, and then how do you work back to what we need today. All those elements of, I'd call it strategy, were really important to that work, because it's not only what physical assets you have to put in the ground, but you know how do you advance technology, how do you accomplish some near-term goals, and then how do you establish an integrated plan to achieve that. So pretty broad view of both the company as well as what assets were um, important to Suncor long term. The exciting component of that project was really, it was not only Suncor that was doing it. It's, if you're familiar with the Pathways organization, it was really a collective of the six largest oil sands companies within Alberta, and how they were all sharing a vision of accomplishing net zero by 2050. And then how can we share infrastructure as an industry to accomplish that? And so it's a very unique approach, because, typically you're acting as competitors, and here you are trying to both develop a project together as well as your own projects that you have at your site to accomplish net zero by 2050.
And what was that like?
First of all, extremely exciting from a leadership perspective, right? Where you have the challenges internally as well as the natural challenges you'll have working with peers, and everyone's got different timelines to work towards. The exciting part about the work was really the sense of alignment between the companies. The details always were varied by company, but the vision and strategically what you wanted to accomplish was very much aligned. And there certainly were challenges. There were challenges when I was there, and I'm sure there's challenges been since I've left. But certainly the principles of what you wanted to accomplish were really well established early, and it very much aligned across the companies, as well as at the most senior levels of each organization. The CEOs would meet weekly on that project, for
Wow.
to get it up and running for an extended period of time. Every Friday morning, they'd be meeting, and the various project teams underneath that would meet weekly as well to support that. So there was a set organizational structure that allowed information and decisions to flow in a way that was, pretty powerful. Nothing I've ever seen, nothing like that I've seen in my career.
So you start second person into the startup, if you will. What did that growth look like? And what is one thing that you're super proud of that you're able to achieve as a team?
Working through the operating model of that organization, what did it need to have in place to be able to function as a group, to be able to advance the best opportunities for Suncor? And so establishing that early and getting buy-in from senior management and the CEO was important. Establishing a roadmap to 2050 was one of the prime accomplishments that I and the team are really proud of. And that work was foundational to allow Suncor to continue to build upon. So really proud about that. And I would say the employees and the team itself and standing up that group, is something I'll always reflect on with pride, right? Because the employee, you have, it's such an area that employees in general want to support and assist. Your drive for how do you develop that talent and how do you help them be successful. The motivation side was there from day one, right? Because people are really excited about doing that work for the organization, because they know it's not only important to the company, but it's important to generations to come.
Of course, if you think about aligning a team around a mission, probably very few that are that compelling.
Yeah, right.
To the global narrative, to the national narrative, to the
Exactly.
Western Canada, to the company, and to the 6 producers that are around the table, and all the others that are watching.
Yeah.
So how do you then take that vision and map it out to the whole organization, whether or not they're a part of the 2050 project team? What are the types of things that you can do to help with the whole enterprise?
My approach, whether it was, at different roles within the organization or even at this, where I ended off my career and heading up to GHG emissions reduction work, was trying to work laterally from an integrated perspective. So, how do I and my peers get on the same page around the work that we're doing, knowing what their priorities are as well as what the priority of this work is? And then how do you also get buy-in vertically? And so trying to invest a lot of time to do that, both at set strategic sessions with our executive leadership team, our ELT, which includes the CEO. And sometimes that would include sessions at the board level to make sure that they're aware of the roadmap and the approach that we're taking, and then making sure that that is communicated well at other leadership tables across the organization to get clear buy-in. And where there are specific projects underway, making sure those clients are actually integrated to the work, so we understand their constraints and their feedback and where the opportunities are within their assets, and making sure that they're they end up owning the solutions that are being advanced within this work.
I mean, it's communicating that vision and that mission and making sure that the message doesn't dilute is much different scale of organization here at Pay Shepherd, but it's a muscle that you need to learn to flex and keep flexing it. Okay, now if you think about like a construction project that you've had, have you been involved in construction projects that have been like capital investments for the organization? And if you had to identify one that you're particularly proud of your involvement, what would that be?
Yeah, so I did head up the projects organization within Suncor, um, in a variety of different roles, heading up a group that was called Strategy and Projects, and then Projects and Supply Chain. And so I did have the opportunity to, the teams themselves had the opportunity to execute large scale projects, partnering with engineering and construction companies, and making sure that combination of what was required from Suncor from an owner's perspective, along with what was required from engineering and construction, were well integrated, through a variety of different projects. Many of them, because of the nature of the work that we do, some of the projects can be 6-7 years from start to finish, given the scale of the investments and the timelines to do, all the due diligence work up front. One of the projects that was not complete when I left, but one that certainly I was quite proud of, was the coke-fired boiler replacement project, installing two 400 megawatt cogens in place of coke boilers that were providing the steam at our oil sands facilities. So it was an opportunity to, eliminate a bunch of emissions at that operations, along with providing clean power to the Alberta grid. That project is largely complete this year. I haven't heard the latest on that, but certainly there was a plan to start up in 2024. And this, it wasn't. This isn't me. There was a great work done by the development teams to come up with this concept, and then to advance it through the execution teams. And so pretty proud of the work that had gone on before, as well as the work of the project team, and how that had advanced towards completion.
How important was it for you to visit the field?
Yeah, so the field visits obviously got compromised by the period of COVID, where we're really limiting who was in the field, and how to make sure that we supported the operation and execution teams, but at the same time not put a burden on the area because of what was going on within the region. I'd say prior to COVID, we had many projects where visiting the frontline teams was really critical. And when I first started in the projects organization, was at the tail end of our Fort Hills project. So that Fort Hills project was approximately $15 billion investment, close to a decade from start to finish, even longer when you think of the original concept. And being in the field at the tail end of that project was great for me personally, and from a leadership perspective, just being able to visit with the site teams. Variety of different contractors were in play, and supporting the completion of the project, and just a great opportunity to see the front line, to walk the construction areas, to visit the progress, and see some of the natural constraints and risks that were associated with the tail end of a project as it was winding up.
I'm particularly interested in the benefits that you saw as a senior leader in the organization, as you described, like visiting the frontline workers, the contractors. Like, what was it that what dots were you able to connect that helped you drive better business outcomes when visiting the field? Because I believe there's a strong relationship between field visits and business value for leaders in the organization, and I'm always interested to hear what it was that connected those dots for you?
Just having spent a good portion of my career in operations, having a solid awareness of what I'd be looking for in terms of what was happening at the at the interface level between the project team and the field workers, I think was helpful.
What would be an example? Sorry to interrupt you. What would be an example of the things that you would look for?
Just simple things like, okay, we're going to go visit a job site. So understanding what work was going to happen during the shift, what should we be on the lookout for, what were employees concerned about, what were the workers concerned about, what is the surrounding leadership doing to address some of those concerns. That, in some cases that gets quite complicated because of, I'm sure you appreciate, you are the owner and the client for the site and for the project, but you're also trying to make sure that the construction organization has the right tools and leadership in place to be able to make sure that the work gets done safely and productively. So things that naturally impede productivity can certainly affect safety and the quality of the work. So making sure that all those elements are being worked on a shift level is really critical. And so having visibility of that was always important. Many of these visits take multiple times to get a good perspective. The one and done visits aren't helpful to the field, and they're not helpful back in your home organization. You really have to invest time to do that and to do it well, but also to support the teams that are there day in, day out.
So what does that cadence look like in your mind?
Yeah, I think in reality it's for a big project where it's critical to the organization, and I'm talking something that will be multi-billion for a company like Suncor. I think that cadence is, for a senior person, would be multiple times per year to visit the site. And when you're getting into the latter stages, probably increasing that frequency just to support, because at that point, some of the teams and the work is demobilizing. And so you're naturally getting into, those organizations have less and less support, right? So trying to make sure that you finish strong is always something we try to do as an organization. And that would be supported right from the project lead right through to various senior roles within the organization.
I love that. Yeah, the more time, the better. And you're right, it dwindles away at the end as people move on from the project life cycle, and you get a change in personnel and maybe a lack of familiarity with how things have been done can lead to all kinds of challenges. So thanks for sharing that. With your perspective over your career in working with construction or service contractors that service the facilities, what are the characteristics of an organization or a contracting organization you say, that's the type of organization that we need to be doing business with? What does that actually look like from a senior executive perspective?
The relationships that we built, with construction organizations, I would say would be centered on a few different attributes. The ability for that organization, along with the engineering organization, and in our case, the owner's team, to be able to fully get on the same page, right? In terms of, what success looked like. And a lot of times that success can be naturally misaligned because individually you have certain contracts with those organizations that are driving certain performance and behavior. And so making sure that some of those areas are ironed out up front, I think was key to establishing, a strong trust relationship with those, both the construction organization and the engineering.
What would an example be? Like making sure you're aligned and clear on things on the front end. What would be an example of something you'd want to make sure you're clear on the front end?
How the construction organizations are compensated, right? And really trying to understand that directly. How does that influence, project performance, and how does that influence, the quality of the workmanship we're receiving as a client and an owner? Ironing out those things up front are really, I think, key to, creating a successful integrated team. How do you manage change within that? How is change addressed both in the field as well as from a personnel perspective? And so I'd say some of those are kind of key examples where you're trying to do that almost as a bit of, in some cases, a bit like a tri-party arrangement where, individually you'll have contracts with a construction company or an engineering company. In some cases, you really all three need to be at the table to really have a unified way to performance the project and make sure that it's successful from all angles.
And how do you ensure that relationship at your level stays as insulated or intact as possible? What does that actually look like?
So I think the way that we did it within Suncor, and this was largely through connecting with independent project organizations to try and establish, best practices, was to think of, well, how do you support the on-site teams? So you'll naturally have management and leadership that are running the projects, and you want to make sure that they have the autonomy and decision authority that's been assigned to them. And then when is it appropriate to escalate things to different levels? And how do you make sure that that connection stays in place on an ongoing basis during the life cycle of the project? You'll naturally establish a bit of a sponsor and steering team to, govern the performance overall. And then how do you make sure that there's transparency of data and information that flows appropriately to various levels as needed. And that's a delicate balance because you don't want to take the autonomy and decision making away from those groups, but you also need to support them when things aren't on the right track.
When you talk about the importance of the information flow on large capital projects and the technology that underpins that, how important is that to be aligned on the front end? And how do you think about those decisions once an investment decision has been made?
Data and the integrity of the data that you're receiving to see the performance of the project is critical. I would say that the tools that we were using, when I was there, I would say were just at their infancy. I don't think they really advanced, to the point where, there was full transparency across all the stakeholder groups that would be seeing all the, consistent set of data and consistent performance metrics. Largely, they were, there was still that risk where there wasn't one source of the truth, if you know what I mean. I think it is important to get to that state where, we're all sharing the right and correct data, and that translates to the right set of performance metrics, and there's full transparency across all stakeholder groups. I think for some of the projects where those tools were developed and they, were executing well on using that information, it's harder to do it on a real time basis compared to, in some cases where operations, you make a move on the plant and you can see the effect of it right away. To get to as close as real time as you can is important. I would say we were still at the point where most of the data was more reflective, I would say. Like it was looking back as opposed to looking back and then predicting what we could do moving forward or what course correction we need to make to get things back on track. So I would say the ability to get as close to real-time data as you can is at the root of, successful performance.
Thank you. Okay, my last question for you. I'll frame it by saying that I've benefited so much in my career from mentorship and having somebody that is willing to package and pass down, call it tribal industry information over time. I've benefited, and I do my part to make sure that I'm passing that information along to others. And so my question for you is, as you reflect on like an incredible career, how important was mentorship for you? And the part B is, have you had the opportunity to mentor and guide others on their journey?
Yeah, so I certainly benefited from mentorship in my career. It was largely informal in nature. It wasn't as as structured as some folks would prefer, and that worked for me. I always felt like for the senior leaders in the organization that were helping guide and coach me through different situations and choices that I needed to make, I always felt like they provided me the right balance of perspective along with the autonomy I needed to really make that decision. And I think on the second part of your question, I would say, I really valued connecting with a variety of folks when I, advanced to different senior roles within the company, and tried to keep those relationships, again, investing, the time that, we both needed to be, both myself being successful as a mentor and receiving feedback from them if what I'm advising on is helping them, along with how they reached out in different situations. I always valued myself as someone that could listen first and help to provide a perspective of how I would handle different situations or choices without trying to you know direct them that they should do this, right? Because that's not really, mentorship in my view.
I agree. Yeah. Listen, I appreciate you taking the time today. It was great to connect and learn like a small fraction of your story. Super interesting, and congrats on your retirement, Joe.
Thank you, Wes, and thank you for setting this up. And yeah, it was a great conversation.